The Duke and Duchess of Sussex will not be returning as working members of the royal family.
He and Meghan felt they had no other option but to leave the royal family behind.
I think the whole plan that Harry and Meghan have is a really problematic one because they're talking about stepping back.
There's one thing I will never forgive the Sussexes for is the amount of stress they caused the Queen.
I don't think they will come back. I think this is the life that Harry actually has always wanted.
The decision that I have made for my wife and I to step back is not one I made lightly.
Meghan has been the catalyst. She has enabled him to do this. She's helped.
Harry and Meghan left as working members of the family, left the country, went to Canada.
The Queen's position is very straightforward. You cannot do and just pick.
There wasn't an easy way for them to be half in and half out royal.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced that they're no longer going to be on the family phone plan anymore.
That he and his wife will no longer be working members of the royal family.
Some people think it's not, but ultimately, Meghan and Harry are doing things their own way.
At midday today, Buckingham Palace confirmed that they would not be returning as working members of the royal family.
In a remarkable break with tradition, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle can go their own way.
As the statement says, they remain much-loved members of the family.
She had served the crown for nearly 70 years. She had survived abdication crises, world wars, and decade after decade of royal scandal. But when her grandson stood before her at Sandringham in January 2020 and told her he wanted out, not all the way out, just halfway, something shifted, something she never fully recovered. Royal historian Hugo Vickers has spent over 6 decades studying the British monarchy. He met the Queen more than 40 times. He was not a casual observer. He was, by most accounts, someone she trusted. And in his landmark 2026 book, Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History, Vickers reveals what that Megxit moment actually cost her. Not the public cost, not the institutional cost, but the private, personal, deeply human cost that the Queen never spoke about openly. What she lost when Harry walked away goes far beyond a title or a role. According to Vickers, she lost something she could never get back. If you want more deep dives like this, make sure to subscribe to Royal Archives. To understand what was lost, you have to go back to what existed before. Prince Harry was not by any measure a peripheral figure in the Queen's inner circle. He was her youngest son's youngest child, the one who carried Diana's warmth, Diana's instinct to connect with people, Diana's ability to walk into a room and make everyone in it feel seen. The Queen had watched Harry grow through grief and military service and genuine public affection. She was proud of him. That is not speculation. That is something Hugo Vickers documents carefully, drawing on conversations and observations built across decades. Harry held a specific role that mattered deeply to the Queen, Captain General of the Royal Marines. It was not a ceremonial posting. The Royal Marines are one of the most elite fighting forces in the world. For the Queen, who had lived through the Second World War, who had watched her father carry the weight of wartime leadership, military service was not background noise. It was identity. It was legacy. And Harry wore that appointment with genuine pride, turning up to engagements with the kind of commitment that palace insiders noted approvingly. Vickers places this on record plainly. He recounts what the Queen privately said when the full weight of Harry's departure became clear. The loss of his military roles, the loss of his working status, the loss of everything she had watched him build. Her words, as Vickers recalls them, were direct, spare even. One minute he's Captain General of the Royal Marines, she said, and the next minute he's just a childminder. That line did not come from anger. It came from something quieter and more painful than anger. It came from disbelief. The announcement itself landed on January 8th, 2020. Harry and Meghan released a statement through their Sussex Royal Instagram account, not through Buckingham Palace, not through any coordinated channel. The statement declared they intended to step back as senior royals, split their time between the United Kingdom and North America, and become financially independent while continuing to support the Queen. The palace was not consulted in advance. That much has been widely reported. What Hugo Vickers adds is the texture of what came next and the position it placed the Queen in. The monarchy was already under strain. Before any of that had settled, came a unilateral announcement that sent shockwaves through the institution she had spent her entire adult life protecting. The Queen's response was to convene what became known as the Sandringham Summit, Harry, Charles, William, and their senior advisors in the same room. According to Vickers, Harry arrived hoping for a negotiated middle ground. He wanted a half-in, half-out arrangement, self-financing but still contributing to royal duties. He did not walk in wanting to leave entirely. The Queen listened. Then she gave him a choice with no room for ambiguity. All in or all out. Not because she was being cold, but because, as Vickers writes, there was no constitutional architecture for what Harry was proposing. You could not carry the crown's authority while building a commercial brand in Hollywood. The two things could not coexist. Harry left Sandringham, according to Vickers, reluctantly out. He had not wanted any of it to end this way. What followed was a period Hugo Vickers describes as one of the most privately painful of the Queen's final years, and the word he uses in interviews about this chapter is stark. He says the stress the Sussexes caused her was, in his view, unforgivable. That is a strong word from a careful historian. It is worth sitting with. The Sandringham Summit produced an agreement. Harry and Meghan would have a year. The Queen herself granted them time to determine whether their new arrangement would work. Vickers notes this detail with deliberate emphasis. She gave him a year. She did not close the door. She did not issue a cold, final verdict. She extended grace, the way she had extended grace through 70 years of complicated family moments. What was also notable was the speed at which the deal was formalized. The Queen issued her own statement on January 18, 2020, 10 days after the Instagram announcement. She spoke of her love for Harry and Meghan, acknowledged the scrutiny they had faced, expressed pride in how quickly Meghan had joined the family. Carefully chosen words, but those close to the palace noted what was absent as much as what was present. No suggestion the departure had been welcomed. A public act of damage control delivered with royal dignity. But the months that followed eroded something that even grace could not repair. In March 2020, the official transition was completed. Harry gave up his patronages, his military titles, his working role. By 2021, the announcement came formally that he would relinquish his position as Captain General of the Royal Marines, an appointment that had to be reassigned, a gap in the ceremonial fabric that had to be quietly filled. The role sat conspicuously vacant, a small but visible reminder of what had departed. Staff who observed the Queen during this period noted that she carried herself with her usual composure. She always did. But those who knew her well could read the difference between composed and untouched. She was not untouched. And then came the Oprah Winfrey interview, March 7th, 2021. The timing matters enormously. Hugo Vickers documents it precisely in his book. Philip had undergone heart surgery just 6 days earlier on March 1st. His medical team had nearly lost him twice on the operating table. The Queen's husband of over 70 years was still in hospital. And with the Duke of Edinburgh fighting for his life, with the monarchy in one of its most fragile moments in living memory, Harry and Meghan sat down with Oprah Winfrey and told the world things the Queen had never heard face to face. Vickers is unsparing. There was, he writes, no consideration for the stress the Queen was under or for the precarious health of the Duke of Edinburgh. The Queen's response came days later. Buckingham Palace released a brief statement acknowledging the interview and noting that some recollections may vary. 4 words, carefully chosen. It was the closest the Queen would ever come, publicly, to saying that what Harry and Meghan had said was not the whole truth. She did not elaborate. She did not escalate. She absorbed it the way she had absorbed every crisis for 70 years, and she kept moving. What Vickers documents is what happened privately. After the interview, he writes, the Queen began asking her lady-in-waiting to stay with her whenever Harry called. Every call, a witness. The woman who had faced down prime ministers, navigated post-war empire, and managed 6 decades of constitutional complexity. She no longer felt comfortable taking her grandson's phone calls alone. That detail is not dramatic. It is devastating. Vickers frames it without theatrics. He simply states what was observed. And what was observed is a queen who had lost something fundamental in her relationship with the boy she had watched become a man. The trust that a private conversation would remain private, the confidence that what she said would not eventually become material for public consumption. She could not be certain anymore, and so she stopped being alone with him, even on the phone. There is another dimension to what the Queen lost that Vickers documents quietly, almost in passing, and it is perhaps the most revealing of all. Before Meghan, the Queen had described her initial impression of Harry's new partner in terms that were genuinely warm. To those close to her, she had called Meghan a breath of fresh air. She had welcomed her. She had watched Harry's happiness with something approaching relief, because the people who knew the Queen understood that she had worried about him, about his grief, about his direction, about what life after Diana, after the army, after the structure of royal service would look like for him without an anchor. Meghan seemed, at first, like an anchor. Vickers writes that the Queen had urged Harry to slow down before the engagement. She had suggested he take another year, get to know her better, build a foundation, not rush. Harry did not take that advice. The engagement was announced in November 2017. The wedding followed in May 2018, just over 6 months later. What the Queen lost in that sequence was something quiet but significant. The comfort of feeling that her counsel still mattered to her grandson. He had heard her. He had simply decided not to listen. And those who were present for her reaction to the wedding day itself noted something reserved in her bearing, not hostile, not cold, but watchful. "You get on with it," she reportedly said to someone close to her. "It's nothing to do with me." 7 words, every one of them measured, none of them warm. By the time the Platinum Jubilee arrived in June 2022, the Queen was 96 years old, managing significant mobility challenges and facing a public celebration of her historic reign that was shadowed by the ongoing tensions with Harry and Meghan. They attended. They brought their children. Harry and Meghan brought 1-year-old Lilibet, the daughter they had named after the Queen's most intimate family nickname, a name used only by those closest to her. It was the first time the Queen had met Lilibet in person. She was, by accounts from those present, genuinely glad to see her. One report described the Queen as thrilled as her 1-year-old great-granddaughter crawled around her feet. That image, 96 years old, watching a child she had only just met for the first time, carries its own quiet weight. Because built into that meeting was everything that had been taken from her. Years of ordinary visits that never happened. A great-grandchild she had known only by name and photograph, until the Jubilee brought them to the same room. Vickers does not overstate the significance of the Lilibet naming, but he does not understate it either. To use the Queen's most private name, the one that dated back to her childhood, the one Prince Philip had called her for over 70 years, as a public birth announcement felt, to those close to the palace, like a trespass. The Queen considered it, in Vickers' words, insensitive to say the least. And when Harry and Meghan visited with the children, the same dynamic held. The Queen, Vickers writes, considered it prudent to have a lady-in-waiting present, a grandmother, meeting her grandchildren, with a witness in the room. That is the quiet, specific cost Hugo Vickers documents. Not the grand constitutional loss, not the public fallout or the tabloid headlines. The private, irrevocable erosion of something that had once been uncomplicated between a grandmother and her grandson. What emerges from Vickers' account is not a story about a queen who was rigid or unforgiving. It is a story about a woman who offered every accommodation she could. A negotiated exit, a year of grace, a public statement in January 2020 that spoke of her love for Harry and Meghan and her pride in Meghan's rapid integration into the family. Those were her words, under her authority, on the official record. She said them because she meant them, or because she was determined to mean them. The two things are not always the same. What Vickers reveals is the gap, the private gap between what the Queen said publicly and what she carried privately. The image of her walking to church at Sandringham on January 19th, 2020, smiling for well-wishers the morning after the summit, composed and gracious as she had always been, while internally absorbing what her grandson had just told her. She had lost his military service. She had lost his daily presence in the institution. She had lost the easy, unguarded phone calls. She had lost, eventually, the comfortable assumption that her private words would remain private. And according to Hugo Vickers, a man who spent 60 years in careful observation of this woman, the distress of those final years, caused in no small part by what began with that January 2020 announcement, cannot be overestimated. He said he will never forgive it. The Queen, of course, said nothing of the sort publicly. She never did. She carried it the way she carried everything, with extraordinary composure and without complaint, all the way to the end. What we are left with, reading Vickers' account, is a question that has no clean answer. If Harry had taken the year his grandmother asked for before proposing, if he had listened when she told him the half-in arrangement could not work, if he had trusted that her counsel came from somewhere other than institutional cold-heartedness, would any of this have unfolded the way it did? Hugo Vickers does not answer that directly. He does not need to. The record he has assembled across decades of observation speaks for itself. What the Megxit announcement forced the Queen to lose was not simply a grandson's working title. It was the version of Harry she had watched grow and believed in and worried over and quietly hoped for. That Harry, the Captain General, the one doing a good job, the one she trusted enough to be alone with, did not come back. That is what she lost, and Hugo Vickers has made sure history knows it. If this story moved you, subscribe to Royal Archives. We go deep into the private moments that shaped the monarchy, the conversations that never made the front pages, and the truth behind the headlines. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on what the Queen's private words reveal. The story of these final years is far from over.